Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3Iron and welcome to our 9th episode in our weekly series on featured builds, where today we are featuring FineWorkWithHillock's Chieftain strength stacking cremation build. Now, for those of you who are new to the channel, we like to give all sorts of credit as much as we can to the build creators, and so if you at any point in time want to take a look at this particular forum guide or the path of building for this particular guide, you can do so by clicking on any of the links provided down in the video description. If you're a veteran of the channel, then you already know the way things work around here. You can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about more video discussions just like this one, or of course you can reference any of the timestamps that are now above my slightly balding forehead if you'd like to reference any of the discussion points that we have in our featured build discussion today. So who is FineWorkWithHillock? FineWorkWithHillock is a player that has been around for a while, and this is his third build guide. So to give you an introduction for this particular guide, FineWorkWithHillock says, "This is my third build guide and was built in collaboration with two other fellas from his guild, his mentor being one of them, and the one and only Uchira Fudish and Seklonos, my apologies if I'm butchering your names, which was the guild leader of my previous guild. It took a large inspiration from Noogie's own build, which was very innovative at the time, and I do not take credit for the POE, the guide, or the build. He just wanted to share his own progress and create his own brainstorming and his own thoughts on this particular iteration of a Chieftain strength stacking cremation build during the Metamorph and Conquer of the Atlas expansion." So getting further into a bit of this particular build, what inspired FineWorkWithHillock to make this particular iteration of a strength stacking Chieftain? Well, a couple of things. First off, he wanted to mess around with the gem cremation and was again inspired a bit by Noogie's hardcore solo self build. This can easily be swapped out for a number of different options, including Scorching Ray, Searing Bond, Righteous Fire, Blade Vortex, or Explosive Arrow. But he also wanted to mess around with potentially going with a life tree or an energy shield tree or a hybrid tree. So there are a couple of ways that you can actually build out this build depending on your own personal preferences. One of them, of course, if you're a life-based build, is to use Cone's Heart. If you are going hybrid or if you are going ES, then you can go Joffrey's Sanctuary. There are, of course, options depending on your personal preferences, which is really great at this point in the league, as a lot of us have got a little bit of currency sitting around. So if you're deciding about at a point in time where you feel like you've got enough currency that maybe you could re-roll a new character, and maybe you want to play it as an energy shield character because maybe you've never done one before, or maybe you want to play it as a life-based character because maybe in the league that we're particularly in as you're seeing this video, maybe it's more of a life-based meta, and so Combs is going to be a bit more efficient, a bit more bang for your buck, as it were. Most of the damage interactions in this particular build circle around and focus in on the particular scepter that we are going to be using for this build. But enough with getting into the details. Let's give a general pros and cons list for this particular build, and then we'll get into the itemization and the passive tree in just a few moments. So first off, the pros. As with any build that we're going to feature here on the channel, we want to see both pros and cons. So the pros are, well, first off, it's got decent map clear. This isn't going to be on the speed of, let's say, an Auto Bomber or, let's say, a Queen of the Forest Magic Finder, but it's got decent map clear such that you are going to feel like you are able to progress through maps. And if you haven't played one of the aforementioned types of fastest builds in Path of Exile, then you might actually find that this build is towards the top end of your map and map clear speed. Also, it's got some challenging gameplay. So if you want to press more than just one button, or if you'd like to do some combos, like for example, Desecrate plus Cremation or something like that, if you're looking for something that is more than just pressing down a single button, or something as boring and mindless as watching your minions run around and kill stuff, then this might be the build for you. I've had numbers of various players, both in guild as well as outside of guild, complain ever since 3.8 Blight League that with the rise of minions and the rise of popularity in the meta for minion gameplay, that a lot of players are simply getting bored with that style of gameplay. So if you're looking for something that's a bit more interactive and a bit more juicy, then this is going to be for you. Next up, this can be really brain dead to play if you want to. If you want to switch to Cremation with Righteous Fire and just use it as a single click button, because none of those things I just said were appealing to you, then you can do that as well. There's a lot of flexibility with this particular tree and with this particular build, depending on your own playstyle. Lastly, it's got good single target, which we've got new bosses to take down this particular expansion of the Atlas that makes it so that way if your build can do single target damage well, then you will be farming very, very efficiently when it comes to taking out bosses. On the con side of things, this build can be expensive. And by can be expensive, I mean it will be expensive. Stat stacking is incredibly expensive, both when it comes to actually spending currency on items, as well as when it comes to spending passive points. So oftentimes when you are playing a stat stacking build, one of the primary things that will hold your build back is actually the number of jewel slots that you have. So while many builds might, let's say, get their full fleshed out build like around level 70-ish or so, because that's when all of your various uniques are available to you to try out and you can really kind of feel the force of your build coming together. With a build that relies so heavily on stacking a great number of jewels in order to stack a particular stat, in this particular case being strength, it means that your build itself is going to scale incredibly hard with the amount of passives that you can put into your character. Meaning if your character is level 80 and you've only got, let's say, 4 jewel sockets unlocked, but by the time you get to, let's say, level 90, you've got 8 jewel sockets unlocked, well, that's a massive, massive difference for a stat stacking build. So just keep that in mind as you're playing. If your build doesn't quite feel like it's coming together yet, it could actually have to do with your passives, not necessarily your currency investment. So this can be expensive on both ends of the spectrum. Also, beware of running no regen maps because they're annoying and frankly, they can be quite frustrating, especially if you're playing hardcore. Like, stay away from it. Just stay away from no regen maps in hardcore in general. Transitioning to take a look at the path of building tree that FineWorkWithHillock has got planned out for us, there's a couple of things to note. First off, in this particular build guide, he does a great job of showing us exactly what sorts of passives to be aiming for at a couple different level thresholds. First off, he's got a tree that's built for level 28, and then another tree that's built for level 41, another tree that's built for level 60, and then finally an end game version of the tree. So if you're looking or ever scratching your head and wondering how exactly am I supposed to progress this build or get from level 1 to level whatever it is that I want to push to, I always like to feature it when a build creator goes out of the way to make the guide themselves easier for us as players to follow and to make decisions along. So starting off, the first thing that you want to aim for is elemental overload. This is the first thing that you're going to be aiming for. As you come out of the Marauder tree and you go up, you're just going to make a straight beeline as you go up this center spine of the tree. You are going to make your way towards elemental overload. It is the single largest damage multiplier on the passive tree for this particular build that is available without ascending. So this particular node is incredibly important, and you're going to make a beeline directly for it. As you continue to level your character, if you're playing in hardcore, I would highly recommend that you come down and you grab Constitution and the entirety of the Scion life wheel. I just like to grab that whenever I'm playing hardcore. If I'm going to life-based character, it's good to grab. Even if you're going to transition into a energy shield based character, if you're starting off as a life-based character, it's good to grab the Scion life wheel early if you're anywhere close to it. But after you go grab elemental overload, come down and grab the rest of the Scion life wheel, so that way you've got plenty of life, and then from there on out you can begin filling out various damage nodes like Heart of Flame up at the very top of the tree, coming over and grabbing some more HP and some defenses with Purity of Flesh, along with some more fire damage with Explosive Impact, and then from there on out you're pretty much going to fill out the tree as needed. Whether or not that's defenses, you can come down and grab Soul of Steel, which is one of my personal favorite nodes on the entirety of the tree. Pretty much any build guide, if you want to endear it to me, is include Soul of Steel in it somehow, that you don't have to pay for it with the oil anointments, because those can be very, very expensive to get Soul of Steel on your particular build. So if you've got a tree that can come down and grab Soul of Steel, you probably should, because it is such an efficient node to grab. 5% additional physical damage reduction, along with 1% to all maximum elemental resistances across the board. That is fantastic. Then, of course, it's also very, very close to Bloodless, which is a good little life health chunk of a wheel, rounding itself out with an 8% increased maximum life, and enemies cannot leech life from you, which is nice in case enemies are trying to leech life from you. Like, let's say, I don't know, a Metamorph boss that's trying to leech life from you and keep itself alive. Nah, if you're Bloodless, you don't have to worry about any of that kind of junk. Taking a look at our Ascendancy tree, you're going to want to first ascend and grab yourself Nagamahu, the Flames Advance. This is going to give you 50% of physical damage converted to fire damage, and then every 10 seconds, you will gain 100% of physical damage as extra fire damage. That is a ton of damage. Now, if at any point in time you're wondering, well, what about the other 6 seconds? Well, very simply put, a lot of stuff is going to be dead by the time the other 6 seconds roll around. A lot of the time when we're fighting bosses, this is particularly useful, because when you are fighting a boss, a lot of the time there is a phased instance or a particular simply new aspect or new chapter that you are fighting the boss in. So for instance, when you're summoning a metamorph boss, there's a few seconds of downtime in between chatting with Tane and eventually assembling the body parts until the metamorph is actually around for you to kill. For instance, with Shaper, you've got several different instances with Shaper, and whenever you come back into the Shaper fight, he starts up with a dialogue. So generally speaking, Nagahamu's Flames Advance isn't going to be something that's going to necessarily carry you through maps, but it's going to be exceptional for carrying you through bosses, and it simply makes a joke out of the entirety of the 10-act story campaign, the bosses that you will be fighting and interacting. So grab Nagahamu Flames Advance first. Then come over and grab Hinakura Death's Fury. This gives you 1% of fire damage leached as life, which is great if you are indeed a life-based build and choose to build this particular version of the tree. If you'd also like 10% strength, since we're a strength stacking build, then this is of course going to be for you. Then you also get 20% chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash for 10 seconds on hit. For those of you who don't understand exactly what this is or exactly what this does, let's take a look at what it means for an enemy to be covered in Ash. Ash is a debuff that causes the affected target to have less movement speed and increased fire damage taken. Ash has a base duration of 4 seconds. Now, the important part about this is that whenever a monster in the game of Path of Exile has a stat that gives it increased fire damage taken, that is effectively for you a more multiplier. So when we're looking at our passive tree and we are actually taking Hinakura's Death's Fury, we've got 20% chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash for 10 seconds on hit. That's every single hit. Cremation hits a gazillion times. I believe the number is 41 projectiles that it fires off of its base. That is a lot of projectiles that it will fire off of its base to essentially cover whatever rare or whatever unique enemy that you are encountering in Ash, which slows its movement speed and acts as a damage multiplier. And moving over from Hinakura to Ramako, Sun's Light, we're going to take this because it gives us 15% fire resistance penetration, it gives us 25% chance to ignite, and it gives us 25% to our fire damage overtime multiplier. It's just more damage across the board, which is fantastic. We're going to round out our Ascendancy choices with Tassalio, the Cleansing Water, which gives us straight up 100% to fire resistance, regenerates 2% of life per second, which is, again, fantastic for a life-based build, and then 10% of our physical damage from hits is taken as fire damage, which is great. We want as much fire resistance as possible because we're converting some of the physical damage that we're taking into fire damage. You can stack this with other sources of physical taken as fire to make it so that way you don't necessarily need to stack as much armor, because more and more percentage of physical damage that you are taking is actually coming in as fire damage, which means you don't have to care so much about it. It's great. On top of that, you're unaffected by Ignite, which means you never need to have a burning Ignite flask remove on your bar, and then you've also got 50% increased life recovery rate if you've taken fire damage from an enemy hit recently, which, by the way, if something hits you with physical or fire, that's going to count because you're converting 10% of physical damage from hits into fire, which means you're just going to have 50% increased life recovery rate pretty much whenever you've taken a hit. Well, it's time for us to come to the jewel of this particular build, as it were, which is the Doon Cuebiyari. Good luck trying to say that 10 times fast. Anyway, this is our particular unique weapon that makes a whole bunch of the mechanics of dealing damage on this particular build work. All of the stats on here are relatively important. We are, of course, a strength stacking build, which means, well, we're going to want strength on all of the gear that we possibly can. This particular weapon has got decent rolls for strength in terms of weapons. It's also a scepter, which means it gives increased elemental damage on its implicit. Then on top of that, our socketed gems are supported by level 30 Iron Will. We also get some flat maximum mana, and then comes the most important part, 1% increased damage per 8 strength when in our main hand. So by using a Doon Cuebiyari in our main hand, we are getting a massive amount of percent increased damage calculated. I just want to show you just really briefly exactly how ridiculous this can get. Let's say, for instance, you have 2,000 strength, which is not outside of the realm of probability with this particular build, depending on your level of investment. If you have 2,000 strength invested with this particular build, and you're getting 1% increased damage per 8 strength, that means we're going to divide this by 8. And that means that we're getting 250% increased damage off of our Doon Cuebiyari. All right? That is insane in terms of the value that one particular weapon can give us. And that is why the Doon Cuebiyari is going to be our best in-slot weapon for this particular build. Transitioning over to chat about gem links, there are a couple of different ways to set up this particular build. The various gem links that you are going to need for this particular build to work are, of course, going to be Cremation, Controlled Destruction, Immolate, Inspiration, Fire Penetration, and Combustion. That is going to be the bread and butter of your 6 link, which is going to generally go into your chest piece, as long as you are using a version of the build that doesn't include a Comb's Heart. You're also going to want to set up a 4-link Vol Molten Shell, Decoy Totem, Flesh and Stone, and Herald of Ash to help boost our damage. And then you're going to want to set up a 4-link Wave of Conviction, Flammability, Curse on Hit, and Culling Strike setup. Lastly, for mobility, you're going to be using Flame Dash with faster casting, linked with Arcane Surge, not leveled past level 70, along with Desecrate. You need a lot of jewels to scale this particular build up. Well, this is what FineWorkWithHillock has to say. This build can be considered a side project to dump your currency in. So do you hear that? All of you mid-league power flexers that want to show off how much currency you have. This is a scaling build to throw your currency at. The more gem slots you have, the more stats you will gain from it. Strength, of course, being the stat that we are looking to focus on here. So the cost of this build can range from budget to several exalts, depending on what league it is, and of course, how many gems you want to buy. Basically, the only real expensive item is the jewel Efficient Training, but bronze also go up in price, and of course, because of demand right now, there is also a relatively high demand for some strength stacking gear like Joffrey's Sanctuary and like the Shaper's Touch. That being said, you can have up to 3 to 5 depending on the gem slots that you have available for Efficient Training, which is a ton of strength for you to grab. Right now, FineWorkWithHillock is using a more budget-friendly version, and he is buying 4% increased strength bronze with 10% reduced intelligence. If you can buy the 6% ones, which of course will just give you more percentage, which is great. Mostly since we don't take advantage from evasion, we don't really care about dexterity. Also, he's using 2 Might of the Meeks, one slightly above the Scion Wheel, above Marauder's starting zone, and the other is near the Templar starting area, a bit to the left side. There's another spot on the tree not far from the Cursed Reservation nodes that can also be used for a 3rd Might of the Meek jewel. As we round this out, I once again just want to give a shout out to FineWorkWithHillock. He has done an exceptional job of putting this build guide together. Dude, I want to applaud you and shake your hand. There is not a better, more well-written, in-depth guide on the forums than this particular build. I feel like I say that every single week because every week we are just seeing various build creators coming out and putting their most exceptional efforts together to show us, other gamers, other community members, how exactly we can go from level 1 to whatever level it is we want to go to. And they're helping us and holding our hands along the way, and we're going in and bookmarking their build guides so that way we can reference it all along the way. And FineWorkWithHillock has done an exceptional job here of showing us exactly how to progress early game, getting through Acts 1, 2, and 3 with this particular build guide, and then of course on and beyond into the stars as we kill Kitava and get onto maps and into the end game. Well, thanks so much for watching. Feel free to drop us a comment with your own questions for FineWorkWithHillock, or of course your own comments or your own ideas for strength stacking chieftains that take advantage of sick build and great spell damage skills such as Cremation, which I myself am taking advantage of and using myself right now. I love Cremation as a skill. It's fantastic. The number of projectiles are ridiculous, and the potential for taking down bosses is off the charts. If you are looking for a build that you can sink your currency into, that you could potentially play with either a smaller budget or a larger budget, and that can be variable and flexible to either play as Life or as ES, I would highly, highly recommend that you take a try and take a spin on FineWorkWithHillock's Cremation Chieftain. Thanks so much for watching. Stay tuned for more YouTube videos right here with us at G3. And as always, I hope today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you right after you kill a boss with FineWorkWithHillock's Cremation Chieftain. Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.